After 5 years of evolution, the Uncanny X-Men have soared to staggering new heights, raising a new generation of heroes, traveling across the Marvel Universe, and taking on near godlike levels of power. But at its core, evolution is ultimately a struggle. The struggle between past and future, destruction and creation, light and dark. What happens when we embrace this newfound power? How does the world around us react to this change? And what must we do to reignite our own humanity? Building on the bold new era launched by 1975's giant-size X-Men, writer Chris Claremont's 17-year run is built on the idea of rapid, ever-present change, with Marvel's mutants rising to the challenge of an ever-violent world while grappling with their own human flaws. But when former X-Man Jean Grey is reborn as the near-omnipotent Phoenix, the line between these powers and the people who wield them starts to blur, with the clear-cut superheroics of earlier issues giving way to more existential battles of morality and humanity. As I've mentioned in previous videos, each era of Claremont's time on X-Men acts as its own story, but when woven together, these become a grander myth about evolution and humanity, with callbacks and long-running themes deepening the meaning of each adventure. And in the second volume of this saga, spanning issues 132 through 153, as well as annuals 4 and 5, Claremont and his artistic collaborators would take the X-Men to their highest highs and lowest lows, setting mythic struggles and apocalyptic threats against a team of imperfect people struggling to become something more. To really understand the impact of this era on the history of X-Men, we will examine how Claremont infuses mythic stakes into stories of self-discovery, the evolution of the book's core struggles, and how this evolution deepens the central mutant metaphor and the heroes who embody it. By 1980, the Uncanny X-Men had gone from a dead title to a massive success, and though much of this can be traced to Claremont's early work with artist Dave Cockrum, as well as Len Wein's giant-size special, the book reached its most popular under the writer's collaboration alongside artist John Byrne, with the duo enriching old history and building new concepts in equal measure. You can trace a number of X mainstays back to this era, from a greater focus on each hero's individuality, to Wolverine's breakout status, to the addition of Canadian supergroup Alpha Flight and their douche of a boss James Hudson. But the strongest through line through Claremont and Byrne's X-Men was Jean Grey's arc from hapless hanger-on to the team's most powerful member. As mentioned previously, the pair's time together was as contentious as it was successful, with the two butting heads on just about everything, from pacing to story to the characterization of each X-Man. And not surprisingly, the addition of a cosmically powered demigod only added to this tension. "I've never liked Phoenix," confessed Byrne. "It's not that I don't like Jean Grey. I've been in love with Jean since we first met, about 1,000,000 years ago when I was 13. I liked Marvel Girl, who I felt had a nicely developed personality and fulfilled a function in the early issues somewhat more advanced than getting captured by the bad guys. But then Chris and Dave Cockrum turned her into Phoenix. Chris's justification being that we needed a strong female character in the group. Then I became the regular artist, and in my first issue, Phoenix saved the universe. And that clarified what had been bothering me. Phoenix was too powerful. The X-Men had become guest stars in their own book, which is why I agitated to get her out of the book as soon as possible."
It's been said that introducing the concept of the Phoenix to the book unfairly skewed the team dynamic and essentially made them impossible to defeat, end of suspense, that sort of thing. Mind you, the same argument was made against the JLA with Superman or the Avengers with Thor,
argues Claremont.
The key is never the power but the person wielding it. Defining Phoenix as a being or entity with a rational agenda of its own, to me, misses the point. Within the context of this series and of the story I was embarking on, it's always been and always should be about Jean. One vulnerable human being finds herself bound irrevocably to the divine. How do you cope? How do you keep from being consumed? How can you keep from being corrupted? And once you fall from grace, even a little, how can you atone?
While the even-handed partnership between Claremont and Byrne had given the book some of its strongest stories to date, with Byrne's more rigid approach to co-plotting reining in Claremont's more ambitious ideas, Jean Grey's ongoing evolution and the struggles it created had to be resolved, one way or another. And not surprisingly, this tension would give way to one of the most iconic stories in X-Men history, reuniting past and present members of the team before setting them against Jean's ever-growing power. Picking up after the ominous warning of issue 131, Claremont and Byrne's saga opens on a moment of relative peace, reuniting the team with former X-Man Angel before investigating the shadowy Hellfire Club. At first glance, Claremont and Byrne even hint at a deepening of the bonds found at the end of the Proteus story, as Jean Grey and Scott Summers finally consummate their relationship. Given the book's focus on evolution, both literal and metaphorical, this opening act should feel triumphant, with Jean's growing abilities mirroring her own self-actualization. But instead of following the more linear journey of earlier years, the creators build their next saga around themes of duality, subverting Phoenix's power through callbacks to her deadly battle with the White Queen, her increasing slips through time, and her fascination with the mysterious Jason Wyngarde. Naturally, this split between heroic instincts and repressed desires are externalized through the Hellfire Club, repurposed by Claremont to act as darkened versions of the X-Men, post-humans who leverage their abilities into literal power. These guys don't want to coexist with the world, they want to dominate it. I mean, just look at what they're wearing, and the temptation they embody gels perfectly with Jean's identity crisis. Wyngarde's reveal as the returning mastermind only builds on these themes of temptation and duality, brainwashing Jean into the club's new Black Queen and turning her own empowerment into a method of control. It's a shocking, almost sacrilegious turn, given Claremont's focus on female empowerment, with implications that only grow deeper over the course of the story. It's no coincidence that the repressive, domineering Hellfire Club are used as foils to the X-Men here. After all, Claremont had started chipping away at the team's unity since Professor X's return, with the Patriarch dismissively trying to cram the new team back into the roles of their predecessors. And fittingly, Claremont only digs deeper into the X-Men's flawed upbringing across the story, as Jean's awakening and corruption starts to unearth the psychological baggage of her teammates. Her brainwashing at Wyngarde's hands ends up almost destroying the formerly put-together Cyclops, with Scott outmaneuvered, humiliated, and seemingly killed without Jean's help. And by contrast, Wolverine ends up fully giving into his animal impulses, gruesomely carving his way through the club's goons. It's a very, I'm gonna say, Freudian take on these characters, using the two male leads to reflect the superego and id for Jean's shifting personality, and quietly walking back the resolution of issue 127, re-cementing their love triangle as a permanent fixture of the book. But most importantly, Claremont and Byrne continue to highlight how both the X-Men and their dark counterparts have ultimately failed Jean Grey, with their repressive methods unleashing something far beyond their control. With this transformation, complete with a scary new red costume, the Dark Phoenix saga becomes a twisted mirror of Jean's evolution through the early years of Claremont's run, culminating in a horrifying moment where Phoenix consumes a sun out of its lust for power, and unknowingly, kills an entire civilization. It's a shocking turn that Claremont had been seeding since the beginnings of his run, using the humanity of this new cast to question the nature of power and how it either corrupts or enlightens the people wielding it. Marvel Comics had already popularized the dysfunctional hero through titles like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, but what sets the Dark Phoenix saga apart from its peers is the nuanced tragedy of its central character. Despite the enormity of Phoenix's actions, Jean never fully gives in to evil or good, constantly swinging between the two. And thanks to Byrne's expressive pencils and Tom Orzechowski's incredible lettering effects, we can see how these struggles continue to torment her. Even the arc's behind-the-scenes production reflects the fractures seen in Jean's character, with Claremont and Byrne originally planning to depower and release her into the custody of the X-Men, which angered Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter and led to the replacement of Editor Jim Salicrup with then-newcomer Louise Simonson. Eventually, the group was able to reach a compromise, redeveloping the last 5 pages of issue 137 to have Jean sacrifice herself to save her friends and pay for the Phoenix's rampage. And though it's a major deviation from where it began, I think the reworked ending gives a fitting close to Jean's arc, once more playing with the saga's themes of duality. While the fall that led to Jean's death is tragic, her sacrifice is an affirmation of the heroism that we all carry in ourselves. And if her loss is enough to close this chapter of the X-Men, then it's the arrival of Kitty Pryde that symbolizes the opening of another. every ending can be a beginning, every failure can lead to a chance for redemption, and the opportunity to grow into something more. Since its beginnings, the Uncanny X-Men has always been a story about our future, and whether or not society can look past its prejudices to truly accept the people of tomorrow. In fact, countless creators over the years have emphasized the title's sci-fi underpinnings, using genre tropes like fear of the other to deepen the subtext of the book and lay the groundwork for the mutant metaphor explored across countless stories. It makes sense then that after the Dark Phoenix saga's examinations of humanity and psychology, Claremont and Byrne's last collaboration would be something short yet impactful, moving the title away from smaller, simpler battles towards something existential and haunting. The result was 1981's Days of Future Past, a two-part adventure following an adult Kate Pryde and the last survivors of the X-Men as they fight to stop a Sentinel apocalypse in the far-flung year of, 2013. Bolivar Trask's famous mutant-hunting robots had made a number of appearances throughout the X-Men's history, even reappearing during Claremont's earlier stories as part of the fringe group Project Armageddon. But whereas these previous stories cast them as little more than easily breakable tin soldiers, it was Byrne, partly inspired by the Doctor Who serial Day of the Daleks, who pushed for the story, exploring the full menace of these machines built on hate. "I wanted to do Sentinels because I thought they were so cool," recounts Byrne. Chris said, "Nah, Sentinels are wimpy." I said, "No, you write them wimpy. That's your problem. Let me plot a story with Sentinels and I'll show you what the Sentinels can do." Magically, the whole plot appeared in my head. Luckily, because it was X-Men and not some guy flying around in a phone booth, there were enough differences not to get sued. While the alternate timeline trope has since become a major staple for both superheroes and sci-fi, Day's arrival in 1981 was nothing short of groundbreaking, especially when held up to the runaway success of the Dark Phoenix saga. Launching readers into a dystopian future and traveling back to the present day alongside Kate, Claremont and Byrne used this dual narrative of present and future to upend the book's superhero trappings, setting the team's more black and white battles with a new brotherhood against a dystopia that feels uncomfortably real. Whether it's Senator Kelly's chilling speeches that evoke racial replacement theory, or the unhinged, violent supremacy of Mystique's new brotherhood, Claremont and Byrne's messaging is clear. Hate of the other is self-consuming and will inevitably doom the world. As revealed by Kate, Kelly's death at the hands of the Brotherhood only clears the way for a more violent extremist, whose reactivation of the Sentinels leads to the decimation of superheroes. And under this new regime, both human and mutant are forced to live in bombed-out ghettos that echo the death camps of the Holocaust, with the all-consuming threat of nuclear war dangling overhead. Working alongside longtime inker Terry Austin and colorist Glynis Wein, Byrne's art contrasts a brighter, warmer present with an underlit, crumbling future, as Claremont's rapid dialogue and narration throw twist after twist at readers. The evolving bonds of these older X-Men, the mysterious new mutant Rachel Summers, a pairing that definitely feels like a regrettable Byrne staple, the haunting fields of superhero tombstones, and most shockingly, the image of Magneto leading the X-Men in Xavier's place, foreshadowing the writer's ongoing reinvention of the character. Each of these concepts would go on to leave lasting marks on the grander story of the X-Men, but according to Claremont, none of that backstory was part of the original plan. By the time Days had reached its publication, Claremont and Byrne had decided to end their partnership, with the writer staying on X-Men while Byrne would give his own take on the Dark Phoenix in the pages of Fantastic Four, along with a more condescending way to end that story. As a result, Days was meant to function as a brief but entertaining final note, and little else. Reflecting on the story, Claremont would state,
"I think the way it evolved was simply by defining a moment, throwing a challenge to the X-Men in the present day, but being totally unable to know whether it worked or not. The whole point in that era of the series was to get on, tell your story, get off, move to the next story. I mean, it was 34 pages start to finish over 2 issues, end of story. It doesn't need to be any more than that. It's all there in John's visual storytelling and in the dialogue, hopefully. That's what a comic should be. You hit 'em hard and you leave the audience wanting more. We knew it might be the final flare of light before the star goes out because it was our penultimate arc on the X-Men. We both knew we were in the last stages before our separation, and this is where everything we had done as Talons and as craftspeople came together.
Naturally, the most enduring part of Days of Future Past is the frightening ambiguity of its finale, with the last of the future X-Men dying in battle against the Sentinels as Kitty just barely manages to save Senator Kelly's life. And yet, despite a brief moment of triumph, Claremont leaves the state of the future totally ambiguous, a major departure from the absolute clean win Byrne wanted. Instead of a sequence where we see the apocalyptic timeline rewritten, the arc ends with Sebastian Shaw and Senator Kelly meeting with new antagonist Henry Gyrick, hinting that the Sentinels and the nightmarish future they bring might still come to pass.
Professor, we saved Senator Kelly. Kitty's mind has been returned to her body. Does that mean we changed the future?
I do not know, Warren. Cliché though it sounds, only time will tell.
While it may have started as a more self-contained adventure, Days of Future Past has built a legacy in the title as large as its predecessor, with countless creators returning to or iterating on this vision of the future, interrogating whether or not these heroes can truly change what's to come. It's a fitting end to the partnership between Byrne and Claremont, a dark, cyclical story that both interrogates and affirms the X-Men's mission. If we don't fight for our future now, then it's already lost. It's a sentiment that would endure even beyond Byrne's departure, with Claremont's stories beginning to highlight the shared human struggles of his major characters, both good and evil. Both Dark Phoenix and Days of Future Past had proved a monumental success, making X-Men Marvel's top-selling title by 1981. But much like when Claremont and Byrne had begun their partnership back in 1977, larger shakeups were on the horizon. After an admittedly fun but shameless Alien ripoff with issue 143, Byrne and inker Terry Austin would move on to other assignments, replaced by Joseph Rubinstein and a returning Dave Cockrum, who trades in the hyper-rendered pencils of earlier issues for something more dynamic and stripped back, while still holding on to fun details like Storm's cat-like eyes. This new chapter in the title also saw the beginnings of Louise Simonson's long-running tenure as editor, giving Claremont more direct control over each issue's plotting instead of the 50-50 split maintained with Byrne. And in place of the tighter, darker storytelling seen over the previous 3 years, issues 144 and beyond see a renewed focus on brighter, more conventional superhero adventures. In fact, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a full-on return to form, because it kind of is. Many of the X-Men's post-Byrne adventures feature them revisiting old enemies and locations. A battle with Arcade brings back older classmates. A trip to the bottom of the Earth reunites them with the mutated villain Garruk. And if that isn't enough, the team even goes back to the Savage Land to avert yet another war with Sauron. I think Angel's reaction here really says it all. Even the Hellfire Club are somewhat flattened in this new batch of adventures, with the suddenly very much alive Emma Frost swapping minds with Storm with no real goal beyond smashing some stuff up. Not exactly fresh concepts, but even still, the writer is able to build a through line across these stories. Namely, in the wake of major adventures that redefine both the X-Men's personal struggles and their larger mission, the grander theme of Claremont and Cockrum's reunion seems to be reasserting the humanity of the people behind the powers. It's a sentiment that the writer would reiterate over the decades, and though bad actors would attempt to co-opt this messaging to erase the title's social subtext, Claremont's stories have a universal nature to them that's impossible to deny. No matter how we look, how we sound, or what we believe, nobody is born perfect. Rather, it's our shared humanity that lets us move beyond our own flaws, with the love of our communities giving us the strength to aspire to something bigger than ourselves.
The bedrock analysis, at least of my approach to the concept and the team, is we're here and we're doing this because we want to have a good life, just like everybody else.
The writer argues.
Everyone will make mistakes along the way, but the idea is to treat those mistakes with a measure of understanding, and help the people responsible make sure they don't do it again, to learn and hopefully get better.
If there had to be a symbol of this hope for a second chance, it would be Kitty Pryde, who from issue 138 graduates to a full-fledged member of the X-Men and serves as a new POV character who brings back the innocence lost through Jean's transformation and death. But with this generational divide within the team, there's also a kind of parental dynamic at play, with each of the team's members fighting to better themselves for the sake of Kitty and the future she represents. With Cyclops leaving the team out of grief, the inexperienced Storm grapples with her role as the team leader and a mother figure to the new recruit. Former X-Men Banshee rejoins the team just in time to discover his own long-lost daughter, causing friction between him and his longtime partner Moira McTaggart. Wolverine's long-simmering violence starts to give way to something more measured, even letting him act as a moral check for some of his fellow X-Men. And this shifting perspective brings more nuanced struggles for the team, who start to use their bond as a found family to help all manner of vulnerable outcasts, at least between all the bouts of punch-ups. The first appearance of Caliban and the Morlocks in issue 148 adds an important wrinkle to the mutant metaphor, revealing an entire subculture of mutants who have been neglected and demonized for their inability to pass as human. It's the first of many hints that the team's mission is even greater and more complex than they realize, stressing the importance of community and understanding. Claremont uses this same understanding to right a major wrong against the character of Carol Danvers, who suffered all manner of abuse and neglect in the disastrous Avengers number 200, and leaves her old teammates for the safety of the X-Men. But maybe the most interesting effect on the book's deepened humanity is the effect it has on Claremont's villains. While, again, it isn't really a major focus, the writer is still able to weave plenty of interesting concepts into the stripped-back stories of this chapter, hinting at the links between Nightcrawler and the villainous Mystique, and devoting an entire arc in Marvel fanfare where the X-Men are able to rehabilitate the reptile villain Sauron, which lasted about a week, but A for effort. Unsurprisingly, one character who benefits the most from these changes is the team's longtime nemesis, Magneto, whose near-fatal wounding of Kitty reveals his own tragic past as a Holocaust survivor, and foreshadows his own redemption down the line, even if he doesn't quite believe in it yet. I think it's incredibly fitting that this becomes one of the driving forces of the title moving forward. If enough suffering can make you into the very thing you hate or fear, then embracing community is the path to salvation, opening us up so that we can let these old wounds finally heal. When held up to the many other chapters in Claremont's long-running tenure, it's indisputable that the 80s were a defining point for the X-Men, giving both soaring highs and somewhat underwhelming lows. But across it all, the writer and his collaborators still managed to dig deeper than ever before, evolving the meaning behind this team of mutants and their shared mission. Of course, Claremont would continue to dabble in the bleaker themes introduced in Dark Phoenix and Days of Future Past over the years, digging further into the complexities of his heroes as they battle against a darkening future. And though the ever-present threat of extinction makes this tragedy seem inevitable, it also lets Claremont elevate the triumphant spirit of the X-Men into something eternal. The fight for tomorrow never ends, but as long as we continue to embrace our shared humanity and foster the good in ourselves and each other, then the hope for a better world will never die. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out today's video, the second, or I guess technically the third entry in my coverage on Chris Claremont's Titanic X-Men run. This is one I've been building up to for a while. The 80s are seen as the golden age of X-Men comics, mostly because of Dark Phoenix and Days of Future Past, but it was really interesting going back and seeing the stories Claremont wrote in the aftermath, and seeing how his moving on from that partnership kind of mirrors the X-Men recovering after losing Jean. I still believe that the strongest theme of Claremont's run is evolution, not just through the superpowers, but through the people who learn to grieve, rebuild, and grow. I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps the channel out a lot. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Carol Ann Brenneman, The Comics Cave, and my patrons, who are helping me to grow this channel and continue doing what I love, and hopefully what you love too. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, stay uncanny.